Hello everyone, back with another deck tech. This time it's going to be a blue-white-red draw-go style control deck, featuring Narset Enlightened Master as the commander. And I think this deck is really well positioned in the metagame right now. It's got a lot of sweepers and spot removal to deal with opposing creature decks, and with the uptick of spot removal from decks in general with the switch to 20 life, you have basically no targets in your deck for spot removal. So Narset is extremely powerful because of that, and as a result, you're playing against decks that have multiple dead cards against you, and you are well positioned against them with your cards. So I think the deck is very well positioned, and we'll just get into it by talking about Narset Enlightened Master first. For 3 blue, red, white, you get a legendary creature, Human Monk. It's a 3/2 with first strike and hexproof. And whenever Narset Enlightened Master attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature cards exiled with Narset this way without paying their mana cost. So, in general, that's going to work well with sorcery speed stuff because it doesn't really matter whether they're instants or not, since you're going to be casting them on your turn. And it's very good with expensive cards, obviously, because you're gaining free mana essentially, but you don't want to overload the deck with cards that are only good with Narset's ability. So you don't have a ton of take extra combat and take extra turn spells in the deck like you would in, say, a multiplayer version of this deck. But you do have enough cards that are just good and powerful with Narset's ability that it's not going to whiff very often, but at the same time, you are playing a lot of counter spells in the deck, so you are going to have times where the ability doesn't really do very much, but it doesn't really matter because you're just going to be really taking control of the game on an axis that your opponent is not prepared to fight on, and that's planeswalkers, a threat that's near impossible to kill, and a bunch of sweepers. So without further ado, we'll get into the rest of the deck. We'll start with some of the best cards to hit with Narset, and that's the planeswalkers. First and foremost, we have Johnny Vengeant for 2 red white. You get a 3 loyalty planeswalker. The +1 ability is target permanent doesn't tap during its controller's next untap step. That's good against big creatures, but also in control mirrors and such. It's good against lands that your opponent has tapped. -2, a Johnny Vengeant deals 3 damage to target creature or player. You gain 3 life. That's very good against small creatures, and the life gain is very nice. And -7, destroy all lands target player controls. A very, very legitimate win condition. It's not uncommon to get to the ultimates on these planeswalkers because your opponent is not going to be able to keep creatures on the table very easily against this deck. Next we have Chandra Flamecaller, which is 4 red for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. +1, put 2 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So that's a very fast clock. 6 a turn, 9 if you have your commander in play, which basically means that it's a 2-turn clock against most decks, between fetching and shocking and such. 0, discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1. This mode will not be used very often in the deck because it's better with proactive plays, uh, whereas this deck is more reactive in nature with a lot of counter spells and stuff. But sometimes you'll have to cycle a bunch of lands away or whatever, and the ability will be relevant. And then -X, Chandra Flamecaller deals X damage to each creature, so just a sweeper on a creature. Chandra Torch of Defiance, +1, exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, Chandra deals 2 damage to each opponent. That'll mostly be used to keep opposing planeswalkers in check if you decide to use that ability. The other +1 is add red to your mana pool. It will let you cast some of the red wraths in the deck, or just any sorcery in general. You'll fulfill the colorless requirement. -3, Chandra Torch of Defiance deals 4 damage to target creature. That'll probably be the most used mode on this card. Just a spot removal, and then it might sit around and accrue some value with the pluses. And then the emblem, whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to target creature or player. Probably not very realistic to get that, but it may happen. It's obviously a very powerful emblem. We have Elspeth Sun's Champion for 4 white, 4 loyalty. +1, put 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens on the battlefield. That's an insanely good +1. It will protect Elspeth or protect you very easily. -3, destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. Conveniently does not hit our commander because Narset is a 3/2. But it will kill big threats on the opposing side. And then -7, you get an emblem with creatures you control have +2/+2 and have flying. That is insanely good. Very often you'll +Elspeth ultimate and still have some soldiers lying around, and then it'll just win the game on its own. Super powerful card. Gideon Jura for 3 white, +2 during target opponent's next turn. Creatures that player controls attack Gideon Jura if able. -2, destroy target tap creature. Both of those modes are very good. You can essentially fog, and then if Narset's in play, you basically get to play Narset and attack freely. The -2 is obviously good spot removal. It combos well with his +2 ability. And 0 until end of turn, Gideon Jura becomes a 6/6 human creature that's still a planeswalker. Human soldier. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to him this turn. So kind of similar to Chandra Torch of Defiance. You can kill the opponent pretty fast with Gideon plus Narset as well. Jace, Architect of Thought, 2 blue for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. +1 until your next turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls attacks, gets -3, -0 until end of turn. So that's good against tokens and mana dorks and such if they are trying to attack you to pressure planeswalkers or life total. -2, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put one pile into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library in any order. Mini Factor Fiction, so just straight up card advantage. And then -8 for each player. Search that player's library for a non-land card and exile it. Then that player shuffles his or her library. You may cast these cards without paying their mana cost. That will almost always win the game if it resolves in this format. You get to get something like Ugin out of your own deck, and then the biggest baddest thing out of your opponent's deck, and that will be quite good. It's not super realistic to try to get there. Most of the time you'll be minusing Jace immediately to get a card advantage off of it, and then you'll probably plus it and minus it again, and then it'll die or whatever, but it still drew you cards. Picture this like a sort of sorcery speed card draw. The card's very good. Then we have Jace the Mind Sculptor. For 2 blue, you get a 3 loyalty planeswalker. +2, look at the top card of target player's library. You may put that card on the top or bottom of that player's library. You can sort of scry on your own deck, or you can try to keep your opponent from drawing cards. You shouldn't look to use this ability aggressively, but sometimes it is correct to do so. The only way your opponent will beat you is a specific card, and if you can force them to draw, say, lands or whatever by fate sealing them, then that will be powerful. 0, draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. This ability is especially sweet with Narset because you can use it pre-combat, then put 2 spells that you want to cast off Narset back on top of your library, and then you can attack and trigger Narset and be able to cast them. But also it's just straight up card advantage. And then -1, return target creature to its owner's hand. Unsummon, it's a valuable ability to protect your life total. And then -12, exile all cards from target player's library. Then that player shuffles his or her hand into his or her library. Again, I've talked about this plenty. It's not a realistic win condition, but it is there, and sometimes in this deck it'll probably happen more often than any other deck. Uh, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, 8 colorless mana, 7 loyalty, +2 Ugin the Spirit Dragon deals 3 damage to target creature or player, so you get to lightning bolt down threats or go upstairs on the opponent and put a clock on them. -X, exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less, that's 1 or more colors. Excellent sweeper. And then -10, you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, and put up to 7 permanents from your hand on the battlefield. Probably not going to happen very often, um, because it's just not like it's obviously good. Sometimes you'll need to gain the life, and drawing 7 cards is obviously absurd, but it's not so much something like I'm going to draw 7 cards and be able to put 7 insane permanents into play. Most of the permanents you're going to draw off this card are going to be lands, so it would be more about drawing the 7 cards and gaining the 7 life than the last part. Uh, Next, we'll talk about the single solitary creature in the deck. Snapcaster Mage, 1 blue, 2/1, flash, human wizard. When Snapcaster Mage enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So this is just a very powerful card. It lets you double up on a sweeper if you need it, a counterspell or spot removal, card draw, etc. It's just a very powerful, versatile card. Uh, it's worth noting for the sake of Cavern of Souls in this deck, you'll want to name Human because the overlap for Snapcaster Mage and Narset is Human on Cavern. Uh, we'll go ahead and talk about the mana base now. Like most mana bases in the format, we're maxed out on the legal fetches and the colors. We have Arid Mesa, Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand, Marsh Flats, Misty Rainforest, Polluted Delta, Scalding Tarn, Windswept Heath, and Wooded Foothills. Then we have the 3 original duels, Volcanic Island, Tundra, Plateau, the 3 Shocklands, Hallowed Fountain, Sacred Foundry, and Steam Vents. From there, we have the 3 Painlands. We have Adakar Waste, Battlefield Forge, and Shivan Reef. This deck list is playing Cascade Bluffs and Mystic Gate as 2 filter lands, not playing Prairie Stream, because in general, like it helps with casting the wraths of the deck, the double red wraths and the double white wraths, but uh, it can be awkward in that it doesn't really help cast any of your counter spells. So it's not in the deck for that reason. We have the 3 temples, Temple of Enlightenment, Epiphany, and Triumph. These are all nice because the deck doesn't do a whole lot on turn 1, so you can afford some tap lands, and the Scry is nice. Speaking of tap lands, we also have Wandering Fumarole, which is a creature land. It taps for blue or red, and you can pay 2 blue-red and make it a 1/4 until end of turn with the ability pay 0, switch its power and toughness, so it can attack for 4 or block as a 1/4. Then we also have Celestial Colonnade, which is a blue-white tap land that you can pay 3 white-blue and it becomes a 4/4 white-blue elemental with flying and vigilance. Uh, we also have a couple tri-lands in the deck. We have Command Tower and Reflecting Pool. Reflecting Pool will tap for a mana of type that one of your lands could produce. We have Wasteland in the deck. You're not going to look to aggressively Wasteland in this deck unless it's very obvious your opponents are missing land, because you do want to get to a point where you can cast your commander and every land is going to help. It's part of the reason that this deck plays 43 lands, which is honestly a ton given recent trends. Um, but you really can't afford to miss a land drop. Your commander costs 6, so you really need to be hitting every single land drop. Also playing Temple of the False God. It's essentially a land that ramps you an extra turn to cast your Narset on turn 5. And with that being said, we also have Myriad Landscape, which comes into play taps for a colorless, then you can pay 2, tap, and sacrifice it, and search your library for 2 basic land cards that share a type and put them into play. So you can grab double plains off this card, or you can grab double island. More often than not, you're going to be grabbing double island. Uh, so we have 4 islands because of that, and 2 plains. Uh, it's also important to note that you want to be able to fetch for multiple islands in the case of Blood Moon, and the same can be said for Plains, whereas it doesn't matter as much for Mountain. Another couple utility lands that we play, Cavern of Souls, as I mentioned earlier, you can't really afford to have your Narset get countered a lot because it is so expensive in the first place. So being able to play your Cavern of Souls to force resolve your Narset is important. Then we have Desolate Lighthouse, which taps for a colorless or for 1 blue red, allows you to loot, which is a nice ability because sometimes you will be stuck with a lot of land and looting them away is nice. Then Igonjo Castle, it taps for a white or for white and tap prevents the next 2 damage that would be dealt to target legendary creature this turn, so it can protect your Narset in combat so that you can kind of attack freely to get the trigger off. Um, and also I failed to mention earlier we are playing all 3 of the buddy lands: Clifftop Retreat, Glacial Fortress, and Sulphur Falls. And I think that just about wraps up the mana base here. It's pretty straightforward. Playing a couple cards that aren't generally seen, like Temple of the False God and Myriad Landscape, but they are very nice in the deck because they accelerate you so much. Next, we'll talk about the instance of the deck. We have Brainstorm. I've talked about this card in extensively. It's very powerful. It's obviously great with the fetch lands because it allows you to basically draw 3 fresh cards, put back 2 bad ones, and then shuffle them away. It's pretty straightforward. It's powerful card draw. Condescend. Um, X blue instant counter target spell unless its controller pays X. So it's often a 2 mana or 3 mana counter spell that scales into the late game. And it also has the extra benefit of allowing you to scry 2. Uh, it's a pretty straightforward card, but it is very good. Counter spell, the classic blue blue counter target spell, very powerful. Cryptic command for 1 blue blue, you get to choose 2, counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand, tap all creatures your opponents control, draw a card. Again, another pretty straightforward card that is super versatile, super powerful. Most often you're going to be choosing counter draw, but occasionally you'll need to bounce an important permanent or save yourself a turn and tap all your opponent's creatures. New card here, disallow counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. The deck can't really afford to play a card like Stifle because Stifle is so unbelievably bad sometimes that you can't afford to have cards that are just completely dead. This has the added ability of doubling up as a Stifle, but it's also going to be a counterspell the vast majority of the time. Dissolve, another 3 mana counterspell, counter target spell, then scry 1. This is, in my opinion, the absolute best 3 mana counterspell because scry 1 is really good on a counterspell. 3 mana counterspells need to be pretty good to be able to get their slot in a deck like this. And I think the versatility of Disallow and the excellent scry 1 make these good enough. Electrolyze, 1 blue red. Electrolyze deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 2 target creatures and or players. Draw a card. Excellent for killing mana creatures early on or X2s, and obviously it cycles so it'll never be dead in a given matchup. Very good. Evasive action, 1 and a blue. Has domain, so for each basic land type among lands you control, you get to counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each. So it's very often a mana leak. It's just another solid piece of 2 converted mana cost counter magic. Next is Factor Fiction for 3 and a blue. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand, the other into your graveyard. Very solid card draw. There's tons of mind games with this card, and it's very skill intensive. So you can often force your opponent into situations where you factor fiction and you reveal a wrath or something, and that's the card that beats them, and they'll separate it with the wrath in one pile, 4 cards in the other. And you get to take the 4 and then play a wrath from your hand, and you just paid 4 mana to draw 4 cards, and that's obviously sweet. But the fact that it's an instant is really nice because you get to hold up counter magic and then end of turn factor fiction, and that's very good. Fire Ice. Fire is 1 in a red and it deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 target creatures and or players. So very similar to Electrolyze, you get to kill off some mana dorks or whatever. And then the Ice mode is tap target permanent, draw a card. You can use this to protect yourself from a big creature, and it cycles to boot. So again, a very versatile card that's never really and truly dead because it cycles. Forbid, 1 blue blue, buyback, discard 2 cards, counter target spell. Uh, the buyback is obviously very expensive on this card. Discarding 2 cards is a lot, but uh, a sweet mode on this card is if you flip it with Narset, you can, if you flip, say, a spell you really care about, a counter spell, and a forbid, and you have 2 cards in your hand that you don't need anymore, lands, blank spot removal, etc. You can cast the spell you care about, respond, cast the counter spell, respond again, cast forbid with buyback, counter the counter spell, get forbid back to your hand so that you have a counter spell for your opponent's next play, and still resolve the actual spell you care about. It's worth noting that you should always be doing that. You should cast your counter spells on themselves whenever you're resolving something that actually matters, because it's better that they're in the graveyard rather than not, for the sake of Snapcaster Mage and Delve spell. So that's an important mode on the card. You can get rid of 2 cards you don't care about to get this to your hand. Force of Will. Uh, there's not a lot to be said here. It's a free counter spell, has a steep price of exiling a card from your hand, but if you need a free counter spell, this is going to do it. It's very important. Into the Royal, 1 and a blue, has kicker of another 1 and a blue, and you can return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If Into the Royal was kicked, you get to draw a card. So it's a nice bounce spell that cycles. Kind of the same philosophy as Fire Ice and Evasive Action. Never actually dead because it cycles. Is it Charm? Blue-red, you get to choose one of 3 modes. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. So some early counter magic for non-creature spells. Is it Charm deals 2 damage to target creature. Early spot removal. Or in the late game, if neither of those modes are relevant, you get to choose draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. So pretty darn good. Nothing exciting, but it has a lot of versatility. Jace's Ingenuity, it's not flashy, it's not absurdly powerful or efficient, but it is good, clean card advantage. 3 blue blue, instant, draw 3 cards. Lightning Bolt, red, deal 3 damage to target creature or player. Good, solid early game spot removal. Lightning Helix, red white, deal 3 damage to target creature or player. You gain 3 life. So again, good solid spot removal, and it has some life gain on it to boot. Logic Knot, this is one of the delve spells I was talking about earlier, and why it's important that you cast your counter magic on itself whenever you exile it with Narset, because you get to delve away cards from your graveyard to pay for the X cost in Logic Knot, and it essentially becomes another counter spell. So blue blue X with delve, counter target spell unless its controller pays X. Good solid late game counter spell. Mana Leak, 1 in a blue, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Very straightforward, good, cheap counter magic. Memory Lapse, 1 in a blue, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of that player's graveyard. Generally, I talk about how card is a great piece of tempo counter magic, but in this deck, it's most closely related to a time walk style card where you're going to counter something like a mana creature, and your opponent really doesn't want to draw that card, but they're forced to draw it again, and that's obviously very good. Miscalculation, one in a blue, counter target spell unless its caster pays an additional two, so just another piece of early game counter magic, but later on in the game, it also has the ability of cycling, which costs two colorless, and you can pay to discard it and draw a card. So if it's not uh, relevant later on in the game, you can discard it, pay the cycling cost, and get a new fresh card. Mystic Confluence, 3 blue blue, choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Draw a card. The card is very versatile, very powerful, very similar to Cryptic Command. You can, choose counter unless they pay 6, draw a card, and you basically get another Cryptic Command. But it also has other modes where just you can have it do a Jace's Ingenuity impersonation and just draw 3 cards, or bouncing creatures is obviously nice if you effectively need another Wrath. Negate, a piece of hard counter magic for non-creature spells, so counter target non-creature spell for 1 and a blue, just efficient. Path to Exile, white, exile target creature. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle his or her library. It's just an efficient piece of spot removal. It's worth noting that you don't really want to cast this early in the game because it effectively ramps your opponent, but it is a piece of hard removal later on in the game. Remand, 1 in a blue, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it into its owner's hand instead of that player's graveyard. Draw a card. Just a good piece of uh, counter magic. I've talked about its double mode before where you counter your own spell in a counter fight to effectively save it from your opponent's counter magic, and you get to draw a card. It's a great card. Swords to Plowshares for a white exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. You don't really care about the opposing player's life total because you have so much inevitability in this deck, and you're just gonna when you're winning, you're gonna be winning by so much that an extra 5 life isn't gonna matter, or often it's a lot less than that. Think twice. For 1 and a blue, you get to draw a card. Flashback 2 and a blue, so you can play it from your graveyard by paying the flashback cost and draw a card. It's just effectively some early game card draw to ensure you hit land drops. Unexpectedly absent, put target non-land permanent into its owner's library just beneath the top X cards of that library. So you can pay a lot of mana and tuck something really deep and effectively not have to worry about it for the rest of the game. Or you can use it as a sort of tempo style play and just top deck something, need to clear a blocker for Narset, etc. Then we have the sorceries in the deck. This is mostly where I think the deck's strengths come from in this current meta. You have a lot of wraths in here. First of all, we'll talk about Ancestral Visions. You have Suspend 4 for a blue. So you pay the blue mana and you exile this card with 4 time counters on it, and then at your upkeep you remove a time counter. When the last is removed, you play this card without paying its mana cost, and its target player draws 3 cards. So it's just very classically good card advantage. Next we have Anger of the Gods. 1 red red. Anger of the Gods deals 3 damage to each creature. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile instead. So just a good early Wrath. Next we have, with some upside against random things like Eternal Witness and Persist creatures, Undying creatures, things like that. Baral's Expertise, another new card. I'm not sure this card is amazing in the deck, but it seems powerful and it's very good with 4 mana Planeswalkers. And this deck has a Johnny Vengeance, Torch of Defiance, Jace Architect of Thought, and Jace the Mind Sculptor. And those are like Baral's Expertise is going to be at its absolute best when you're playing it. You're bouncing basically your opponent's entire board back to their hand, and you're casting 4 CMC Planeswalker off of it. Uh, but it's also a good card to cast off Narset because it's effectively another Wrath, and you could cast, something from your hand if that's relevant. The card, I'm not sure, like I said, if it's super great or not, but I'm willing to give it a chance. I think it has potential. Council's Judgment, one blue, white, sorry, and it has Will of the Council. Starting with you, each player votes for a non-land permanent you don't control. Exile each permanent with the most votes or tied for the most votes. So it's just spot removal. It can deal with any non-land permanent because it gets around hexproof, shroud, protection, etc. It's not super mana efficient, but it is a very powerful card, so it's good in this deck. Day of Judgment, 2 white, destroy all creatures. The first of the destroy all wraths. It's uh, the worst one, but it's still plenty good. Fiery Confluence, 2 red. You choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. Deals 1 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each opponent, destroy target artifact. Most often you're gonna deal 3 to each creature and just wrath the table, but you also need the ability in the deck to be able to permanently deal with artifacts. I don't think there are a ton of enchantments running around in the format, but if there are problem ones, you could add a piece of artifact or sorry, enchantment removal. The first one I would go to is Wear Tear because I think it is the best, but beyond that, you have actual disenchant, but my personal preference for that would be to play Seal of Cleansing because it's better with Narset's ability. You can cast it and then basically store a disenchant and play, which is nice. But this card also checks opposing planeswalkers, which is nice. So the card is very versatile, so it is very good in my opinion. We have Flame Slash, red, deal 4 damage to target creature. Another piece of cheap early game interaction. Order of Succession, 3 blue. Choose left or right, starting with you and proceeding in the chosen direction. Each player chooses a creature controlled by the next player in that direction. Each player gains control of the creature he or she chose. This is essentially just a one-sided effect because you have 2 creatures in the entire deck. So you just get to basically mind control something without having to leave an enchantment, stuck on the creature. It's very good. It's insane when you take, a really good creature. We have Ponder, which is for a single blue, look at the top 3 cards of your library and then put them back in any order. You may shuffle your library, draw a card. So this is essentially just some early game card manipulation so that you can ensure you hit your land drops. And the same can be said about Preordain. For a single blue, scry 2, then draw a card. They both basically do the same thing in the deck, which is ensure you hit your early land drops. Pyroclasm, 1 and a red, deal 2 damage to each creature. Cheap Wrath. Radiant Flames, 2 red. Deal X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colors of mana you spent to cast Radiant Flames, so you can do it for 1, 2, or 3, depending on what you need. Most often it'll be for 2 or 3, because it's honestly pretty tough to get red in the deck. It's just another 3 damage Wrath for 3 mana, and the same can be said about Slagstorm. 1 red. Choose 1. Slagstorm deals 3 damage to each creature, or Slagstorm deals 3 damage to each player. So kind of similar to Fiery Confluence in that you can use this to check planeswalkers as well if that's important. Supreme Verdict, 1 white, blue. Supreme Verdict can't be countered. Destroy all creatures. Another Wrath. Temporal Manipulation, 3 blue. Take an extra turn after this one. The card is just a take extra turn spell. It's extremely powerful with Narset. We have another one, Temporal Trespass, 8 blue with Delve. So it's the other Delve card in the deck, and why it's important that you cast your counter magic on itself with Narset. Uh, and this just, again, allows you to take an extra turn after this one. Exile Temporal Trespass, sorry. And then Time Warp, another temporal manipulation, effectively. Just target player takes an extra turn after this one. Then we have Timely Reinforcements, another source of life gain in the deck. 2 and a white. If you have less life than an opponent, you gain 6 life. If you control fewer creatures than an opponent, put 3/1/1 white soldier creature tokens on the battlefield. Most of the time you'll have less life than the opponent because you're the control deck, but you'll literally almost always have fewer creatures because you play two, and then obviously a few tokens from your planeswalkers. But the card is very good against a few select decks, and it's basically never dead in the deck. Then we have Wrath of God for 2 white, destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. So another Wrath, and this one has the additional clause of making the creatures be unable to be regenerated. It's not super relevant in this format, but it will come up occasionally. So, like I said, this is just a blue, white, red draw go style control deck, and I think it's pretty well positioned right now because of the massive uptick of spot removal and creature decks and the general lack of combo in the format where sometimes your counter spells are overloaded and you just can't counter every super relevant spell. But those decks aren't really around right now, so Narset is going to be able to really prey on the mid-rangey style creature decks. You might have some trouble with Zergo because the Wraths are fine against them, but not amazing, and the deck isn't packing a whole ton of life gain. That could be something that you could metagame for. Could play some more spot removal to help against the creatures if that's necessary, and obviously some more life gain if that's what you need. But yeah, if you're thinking about playing a dedicated control style deck, you should definitely look to play this deck, or check out my deck tech on Leovold. That's another great option. Thank you for watching.